Very good. Well, good evening, everyone. Thanks again for joining us on this next installment of our series on ADAS calibration. We're here at part 3, where we're going to be discussing sensor technology. And again, as we go through this, if any questions come up, go ahead and type those in the chat box, or we'll have a pause at the end and we'll take questions and answers then. So as I mentioned, today we're going to be talking about sensing and imaging technology, the different sensors that are used by ADAS systems in order to perform all the ADAS magic that they do. There are a variety of different types of cameras and sensors that are used by different ADAS systems, and we're going to discuss some of the most common ones. Now, one thing to keep in mind, we did mention this briefly in a previous segment, but excuse me, as we're performing ADAS calibrations, we are actually calibrating these components. We're not necessarily calibrating the systems. The systems are software. The software takes advantage of these sensors, and we're calibrating, and in many times aiming and then calibrating these sensors. What I mean by aiming, that's a mechanical or a physical adjustment of the sensor to ensure that it is pointing in the correct direction. So you can see there's a whole bunch of different types of sensors, and even when it comes to the different types of radar sensors, there's even subcategories with long range, medium range, short range, ultra short range, different sensors for every purpose. And even though a lot of these sensors may look similar, in fact, if you look at the image of medium range radar, those 3 sensors are all Bosch radar sensors. And you may have 6 or 8 different vehicle manufacturers that utilize that one Bosch part number sensor, but on each OEM, they have their own part number because the firmware or the software within the sensor is custom written by that OEM. So even though the Bosch part number may be the same, these components are not interchangeable from vehicle to vehicle. And in many instances, you can't even install a used component on some vehicles because they get coded or married to the VIN of the vehicle. So we'll go through, we'll talk about some of those different topics as we go through each of the categories of different components. So probably the most commonly calibrated component on an ADAS-equipped vehicle is the camera. And cameras are utilized in a variety of different functions. When it comes to ADAS, we have all the different lane keeping technologies that we discussed 2 weeks ago. There are some OEMs that utilize cameras in the side view mirrors for blind spot detection, forward collision, adaptive headlights, backup assist, around view monitoring, adaptive cruise control. Now, some of these forward collision warning and adaptive cruise are generally thought to be only a radar-based system. Well, that's actually not true. Most of these systems that utilize a radar to perform automatic emergency braking, forward collision, and such are using the camera as a backup. What the OEM engineers have found is that by writing sophisticated software to take advantage of more than one sensor to do one job, they can be more accurate, more precise, and they can come to a decision for an action that the vehicle needs to take much more quickly than just relying on a single component. So the first and most common type of cameras, the windshield mounted cameras for lane keeping technologies, are the monocular or single lens cameras. They're relatively low cost. They're not very big. They're about the size of a pack of playing cards, maybe a little bit larger. Very widely used because of the low cost. But being that it's a single lens camera, it has limited depth perception. What that means is the camera alone cannot judge distances very well. So this is one of the reasons why vehicle manufacturers utilize a camera and a radar sensor together called sensor fusion. The radar sensor can judge distances very accurately, very precisely. The camera has other strengths. And by putting the two together, they can get the best of both worlds. Radar sensors are good at detecting an object. There is an object there. A camera is good at classifying an object. There's an object there, and it is a car, or it is a pedestrian, or it's a mailbox. Because these cameras, for the most part, see the way we do, they can distinguish different types of objects from each other. And that's really all done because of the advanced software that's written into these cameras. Now, initially, in the most early iterations of lane departure technologies, these cameras were restricted to lane keeping technologies. That's all they did. You go back to 2004 when General Motors came out with their first lane departure warning system. It was based on a forward-facing camera, and all that camera did was look for the lane lines and determine how well the vehicle was centered between the lane lines. And if the vehicle got too close to a lane line, then it would give a warning. Well, today, with software enhancements, even the most fundamental single lens cameras have many more applications, as you saw on the list on the previous slide. And again, it's all thanks to the increased level of technology that's put into the software that utilizes the hardware technology from the camera. So as we get into newer and newer vehicles, you'll start to see stereoscopic cameras. These are cameras with two lenses. Now, the benefit of a stereoscopic camera is that the lenses are separated. And the farther apart the lenses are, the better they can judge distance. It's a newer technology and it is more expensive. So generally you see these on higher end vehicles or as an optional system on a more midline vehicle. But this is really where camera technology is heading as we move forward because of the level of sophistication required in order to make these systems function. Stereo cameras are becoming almost necessary on many of the newer, very high-line vehicles that are very well equipped with ADAS functionality. Now, here's an example of a stereo camera from a Subaru. This is the Subaru EyeSight system. Notice how far apart those lenses are. This is a very large camera module. It's actually not mounted to the windshield. It's mounted to the roof of the car, but it still requires calibration if the windshield is changed because you're changing the way the camera sees the world when a windshield is changed. A replacement windshield may not have the same color or clarity or curvature. So the camera needs to be taught that it's looking through a new windshield, just like we go to an eye doctor and get fitted for a new set of eyeglasses. What's really interesting about the Subaru EyeSight system is they do not utilize a forward radar at all, but they still have forward collision warning, adaptive cruise control, and automatic emergency braking that are solely the product of this stereoscopic camera and very, very sophisticated software. Now, Subaru's lane departure systems are very sophisticated and work incredibly well. I do know that their forward collision warning and automatic emergency braking does not work as well as some of the high-end radar systems, but I will tell you, based on the fact that it is camera only, it does an exceptional job at performing a multitude of functions from one piece of hardware. Another area of use for cameras is in some vehicles for blind spot detection. Also for around view monitoring, you'll see cameras in side view mirrors. Honda is a famous one. They have their system called Lane Watch, which uses a camera on the passenger side outside mirror only. And it's strictly for detecting objects in a driver's blind spot on the passenger side. They're not using anything on the driver's side. But again, these cameras mounted in the mirrors can also be used for 360 degree around view monitoring, for parking assist on many vehicles. There's a function called lane change assist that is actually a function of blind spot detection, but it takes blind spot detection a step further, where blind spot detection warns the driver that there's a vehicle next to you when you're attempting to change lanes and you use your turn signal. Lane change assist will actually prevent the driver from changing lanes if it detects a vehicle in that lane, or at least attempt to prevent. Gives a little tug in the opposite direction on the steering wheel, but the driver can easily overcome that if necessary. Now, this is a not necessarily pretty chart, but something I threw together one night. I was on the road, done a long traveling stint, late night in a hotel. I started, someone asked the question, what is the resolution of a lane departure warning camera? So I started looking into it, and I started studying the different resolutions of different types of imaging devices. So for instance, if you look at a high definition television, 720p, that's around 1 megapixel, where a full HD TV at 1080p is a little bit more than 2 megapixels, and the new 4K TVs are 8.3 megapixels. Then you shift all the way to the left, and the latest technology, 8K systems, 33 megapixels. Now there are cell phone cameras that have 108 megapixel cameras. So the question I normally pose to a live audience is, where would you think on this chart a forward-facing camera, a typical monocular forward-facing camera would fall? And I generally get input like 2 megapixels, maybe 8 megapixels, considering that these cameras are really responsible for people's lives, saving them from getting into collisions, preventing collisions, monitoring, or actually semi-self-driving vehicles are relying on these cameras. But the fact of the matter is, monocular cameras, the most basic ones, are generally in the 0.3 megapixel range. That's 640 by 480. Now, for those of you who were around back in 1990, Sony came out with the first commercially available digital camera. The thing was about the size of a shoebox. I mean, exaggeration, but it was big. It used a 3.5-inch floppy disk. And for those of you who weren't around in 1990, that's a very big SD card. And it took maybe a couple of dozen pictures that it could store on that disk. So not very high tech in today's terms, but yet vehicle manufacturers, even vehicle manufacturers in 2021, are still using cameras with this low resolution. Now, some higher end cameras like stereoscopic cameras are generally just over a megapixel, so around the 1.2 megapixel range. The reason that vehicle manufacturers and, well, the camera manufacturers are producing these cameras at such a low resolution is, one, these cameras need to take a severe beating in day-to-day life. They're bounced around, they're put through vibrations, they're put through heat and cold extremes, negative 40 degrees below zero, and in some cases even further, well upwards of 250 degrees when a car is sitting out in the sun, all day. And they need to survive for at least 8 years to meet warranty requirements. But the biggest reason is that the OEMs use these lower resolution cameras, and no, it's not cost, it's computer bandwidth. The processing power and the memory capacity that would be required to use an 8 or 12 megapixel camera for lane departure warning would be astronomical. The size of the computers in the vehicle, the number of processors, the amount of power that those processors would take, the amount of storage capacity needed to store long pieces of video at very high resolution is just way too costly. So what the OEMs do is they utilize these lower resolution cameras, and they write hyper sophisticated software and algorithms to be able to identify objects within the low resolution images to determine what the car needs to pay attention to, what is a threat and what isn't. So let me show you a couple of different things about how the OEMs utilize cameras. And not every OEM does things the same way, but first one is called edge detection. So here we have an image on the left that is how we see the world. The image on the right is the end result of a processed image. Now notice it's pure black and white. A pure black and white image has the lowest bandwidth and memory requirement, way lower than even a grayscale image. But what many of these systems are doing is what's called edge detection. It will take that image on the left and put it through 16 to 18 layers of processing to get to the image on the right. Now, consider that for a moment. Every frame of video needs to be processed 16 to 18 times to come up with the image that the ADAS system is going to use to determine, in this case, lane departure warning, how close are you to a lane marking. So if these were incredibly high resolution images, the processing would take way too long and the ADAS systems wouldn't have the functionality that they do today. So edge detection is used by a lot of OEMs. They're starting to get away with it as software becomes more advanced and as hardware becomes more sophisticated and the ability to process the images becomes a little bit easier. So here is an image directly from the forward-facing camera of a 2018 Toyota SUV. So notice how grainy that is. So this particular image, one of the things that Toyota does is when the vehicle undergoes what Toyota calls an ADAS event, like a forward collision warning or automatic emergency braking, a serious ADAS event, it captures a series of still images and stores them in the airbag module. They put it in the airbag module because that's where crash investigators go for accident investigation. So this is one of 10 still images. So they capture this series of still images and they put it into a file format. Think of an animated GIF. It's not really an animated GIF, but that's what it looks like. They make it so you could play it back as a video. And these images can be extracted from the vehicle with a scan tool. Toyota finally made this information available back in 2019. But notice in the image that all the vehicles are, you can tell in this grayscale image, slightly different colors, but the vehicle in front of us. What occurred here is that Chevy vehicle in front of us cut in front of the Toyota vehicle and then slammed on its brakes. And it was at such a close range that forward collision warning went off. But notice how the brake lights on that vehicle in front of us stand out so clearly. That's part of the image enhancements that the camera does. So it's using contrast controls to focus on what's important. Right now, the camera doesn't need to know that that is a Chevy Equinox. It needs to know that it's a vehicle, but it really needs to know whether or not the brake lights are on. So they focus on what's necessary for the ADAS system to do its job, and they disregard all the rest. So they have software that can actually identify all those blobs you see on the road and tell us within a degree of accuracy, it will actually provide a percentage that it will say in front of us is an SUV, to the left of us is a car, to the far left is a truck. And it can identify with a level percentage of accuracy how close they guessed at what that particular object is. Now, this next one I'm going to show you is a real-time lane detection video. This is not from an OEM. This is from a third-party supplier that is trying to sell their technology to an OEM. Now, before I play this, I want to talk a little bit about it. What you're going to see is, again, it is a grayscale image. It is not color. But the camera and the software identify the lane markings in green. Now, as we see the vehicle being driven and it's identifying the lane markings in green, you'll see sometimes where the lane markings are reflected in the guardrail or in a passing vehicle, and they're actually identified on the passing vehicle as a lane marking because camera doesn't know any better. It sees a lane marking, it doesn't know that it's a reflection. And there's boxes drawn around vehicles. These are called bounding boxes. And bounding boxes serve a couple of different purposes. One, a vehicle manufacturer will have a bounding box in a specific color to identify a car versus a truck versus a pedestrian versus a motorcycle versus a mailbox, things like that. Two, there will be a second bounding box sometimes that will be in red. The red bounding box in this example indicates an object that is a threat to our vehicle. So with that in mind, let's take a look at what this video looks like. You'll see it's a lot higher resolution than what we saw previously, but still not incredibly high resolution. Doing a pretty decent job at identifying lane markings. And then as a vehicle comes and passes us on the left, that one, you'll actually see the lane markings reflected in the side of the vehicle. But it's not like the car is going to change the attitude of the vehicle because it saw that. It uses logic and it knows that it's in the center of a set of lane markings and that's what it's watching. So as vehicles get farther away, like you see the vehicle in the far right-hand lane, it's no longer surrounded by bounding boxes because the software can't necessarily identify what it is. And it's also not perceiving it as a threat. So once it gets out of the range of being a threat, you'll see the bounding boxes disappear. Now another system, and this is just a still image, that is a third-party program, a system that's, again, they're trying to sell it to the to the OEMs. This particular system does an incredible job, much higher resolution. This is closer to like a 720p resolution, but they do a great job of color coding objects. Notice the lane lines are yellow, the roads are green. Other markings on the road are in purple. Pedestrians are in red, vehicles are in blue. So it's calling all this out, and the software uses this to make decisions about how it is going to control the vehicle. So why is all this important about how cameras see and how the software works to detect objects? Well, these systems can only function as well as they are calibrated. If a vehicle undergoes a service like a wheel alignment or a change in windshield and the forward-facing camera is not recalibrated, it will no longer be accurate, which means the system may not be able to make accurate decisions about what it sees in front of it, which could result in a delayed response of a critical safety system that might not be able to avoid a collision or hitting a pedestrian or something like that. So as we move forward, when talking about cameras, one very important aspect of the accuracy of a camera and the ability of the camera to be utilized properly through the ADAS system is the camera bracket on the windshield. Now, generally a car comes in for service, let's say a wheel alignment, and we're going to perform a calibration afterwards. We may not even consider the camera and the bracket as being an issue, but that consideration must be made, because if that camera isn't securely attached in that bracket, it cannot function properly. It won't be sitting at the proper angle. So you may get a calibration failure. You may get a calibration that passes, but when you test drive the vehicle, the systems don't function properly. And it's not just lane departure warning, but critical safety systems like automatic emergency braking and forward collision warning. Which brings me to a study done by the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety. They performed a study on aftermarket windshields, and they produced a paper, and you can search it on Google, IIHS Advisory 43. So if you look that up, you'll see it's a long document, but it goes through this study of a multitude of brands of different aftermarket windshields compared to OEM windshields. And they make it perfectly clear that in starting this study, they were expecting to find quality issues with glass that wasn't as clear or the wrong color, didn't have the right curvature, or was warped and rippled that would prevent the camera from seeing clearly. Well, it turns out even some of the least expensive windshields all passed the glass quality test. But what they found was not all the windshields passed the windshield bracket test. So what they've done here is they've mounted a windshield in a vise and a bench, and they leveled the windshield. When you do this and you place a level on the camera, that camera should also be level. Well, this particular windshield, the camera bracket was rotated 0.6 degrees. It doesn't sound like a lot. But on this vehicle, this turned out to be a Honda Civic. They were only testing Honda Civics just to keep things consistent. What they found was the lane departure warning system functioned properly, but the automatic emergency braking and forward collision warning no longer provided an ample warning to prevent an accident. Now, IIHS has this huge test facility in Virginia. They've got this massive test course where they have these big foam rubber target vehicles. It's a vehicle that looks like a car. It's made of foam rubber, but it's coated with a radar reflective material, so a radar sensor would see it like it would see it a real car. And what they did was they tested these systems at 37 miles an hour, so not very fast, but they drove the vehicles at 37 miles an hour toward this foam rubber target. And what they found was with the OEM windshield or an aftermarket windshield that met the OEM specs with the camera bracket, every time that vehicle was able to stop the vehicle well in time to prevent a collision with the target vehicle. They actually have some sophisticated testing equipment that can measure down to the millisecond how much reaction time the system was given by the camera and the radar. And what they found was with the OEM or OEM equivalent windshields, the system got 3.67 seconds of advanced notice, which gave it more than enough time to stop the vehicle. But this windshield with 0.6 degrees rotation of the camera bracket, it cut that response time down to 1.6 seconds, which was the difference between preventing a collision every time to the vehicle getting into a collision every time. So little differences make all the difference in the world. And that's when we get into one of the future courses segments on calibration best practices. We're going to dive deep into why it is so critical to perform every step of the calibration precisely. So what actually happens here? So when the pitch angle of the camera is incorrect, and that's the up-down angle, where the camera is viewing the road changes. So here's an example of a camera that the pitch angle is 1 degree too low, and it's viewing the road more closely to the vehicle than a normally calibrated camera that would view the road at a distance. And this little change, this 1 degree difference, can make all the difference when it comes to real world operation of these systems. So next, talking about radar sensors. There are radar sensors that can be mounted all around the vehicle. Many vehicles have one radar sensor in the grille. There are some vehicles that have 2 or more in the front grille or behind the front bumper. There are vehicles that have radar sensors in the back, 2 in the corners for blind spot, 1 or 2 in the back bumper for rear collision warning or rear automatic braking. So radar sensors can be all around the vehicle. Some vehicles like high-end Audis have as many as 8 to 12 radar sensors. Each one requires an individual calibration. That's why on some high-end Audi vehicles, the Audi labor guide for ADAS calibration calls for 8 hours because they require the entire vehicle be calibrated, because every ADAS system shares information between different components. So common types of radar sensors, especially when dealing with things like forward collision warning, adaptive cruise control, automatic emergency braking, would be a long-range radar sensor. That would be the image on the top. This particular sensor on the top is a Bosch radar sensor. This one has a telltale dome, which only Bosch has. But Another thing that tips us off to this being a Bosch sensor is that little 10 millimeter silver square. That square is a mirror. That mirror is utilized during the calibration process, technically before the calibration process, during the mechanical aiming of the radar sensor. It's critical that radar sensors are aimed properly before they can be calibrated, because radar sensors have a very limited range of adaptation for changes in vehicle operation. So basically that mirror, you would have a fixture. There's different OEMs do it different ways, but for instance, the Autel system, you would have a fixture with a laser. The laser shines and you point it directly at that mirror and it reflects back to your calibration fixture. And what you need to do is with the screws on the radar sensor, you adjust the sensor up and down or side to side until that reflected laser beam falls back into the center of the calibration fixture. That indicates that the sensor is properly aimed both vertically and horizontally. Now, other manufacturers, there's a Continental sensor on the bottom. They don't use a mirror. They have different ways of mechanically aiming the sensor. They may use a digital angle gauge or a digital inclinometer to physically measure the position of the sensor, which typically that's a tool that you can use on just about any radar sensor if you just needed to do a quick check. Medium range radar sensors, like the one off to the right, are generally used on rear collision warning, cross traffic alert. Now, cross traffic could be forward cross traffic or rear cross traffic, and even getting into rear rear automatic braking. And then short range radar sensors are generally used for, in some cases, cross traffic alert, but also blind spot detection. In some cases, they could also be used for pedestrian detection. And some vehicles even use an ultra short range radar sensor as a parking sensor, more accurate than the ultrasonic sensors that we've had in vehicles for years. So very basically, how does a radar sensor function? So let's just say here, we're driving this yellow car, this yellow Audi, and it has a radar sensor in the center of the front grille. And this radar sensor sends out a radio wave at nearly the speed of light from a very tiny point in the radar sensor, almost a pinpoint. It's a transmission antenna, very small. But as soon as that radar wave leaves the radar sensor, it starts to expand outward, just like ripples in a pond when you drop a pebble in water. But what's controlling the spread of these radar waves is what's called the divergence cone. There is a set angle built into every radar sensor. The OEM determines this, not the manufacturer of the sensor. And they determine how wide in degrees this cone will be. And this will be the detection cone, that the radar sensor will be able to detect any objects within this cone within a specific distance that the sensor is designed for use. So in this case, we're dealing with a long-range radar sensor. And this isn't important to know for calibrations, but this particular sensor operates at a frequency of 77 gigahertz. And I'm just using this in this example. So this radio wave leaves the radar sensor at 77 gigahertz, and it goes out and it's looking for an object. So it encounters that white or gray vehicle in front of us, and the radio wave reflects off of that vehicle and returns to our radar sensor, where a receiving antenna picks it up and then software analyzes it. So if that returned signature comes back at the same frequency at which it was sent, that indicates that the vehicle or object in front of us is maintaining a fixed distance and a fixed relative speed to our vehicle. Now, keep in mind that this radar pulse is happening thousands of times per second. So this isn't just like a pulse and then it comes back and a couple of seconds later, another pulse. This is happening constantly. So now if this radio wave comes back to our radar sensor and it is determined that the frequency is lower than it was when it was sent out, that's an indication that either we are slowing down or the vehicle in front of us is speeding up. The gap is increasing. The relative speed is increasing between our two vehicles. On the other hand, if the signal coming back is at a higher frequency, that indicates that the gap is closing and the relative speed between the two vehicles is decreasing. So maybe that vehicle in front of us slammed on the brakes or we accelerated and weren't paying attention. So the system will then analyze these signals to help determine if any corrective action is necessary. So if we look at this a different way, so now we're driving the blue car and we have a radar sensor that has a divergence cone of 18 degrees. So this cone leaves our radar sensor, and in this case, we're detecting a vehicle that's 200 meters ahead of us. Generally, a radar sensor will operate 200 to 300 meters, sometimes a little bit more, but the design parameters are developed by the vehicle OEM. But this radar sensor sends a signal straight out from the face of the radar sensor. And that signal is sent out at what's called the reference angle, 0 degrees, straight out from the sensor. And that reference signal goes out, it encounters that yellow vehicle, the radio wave reflects back, and our radar sensor analyzes it, and it says, there's a vehicle in front of us, it's 200 meters away, and it's maintaining a stable distance. It's not accelerating or decelerating. So what happens with this reference angle is the highest intensity return signal will happen on the reference angle. So if this radar sensor is aimed properly and it's calibrated properly, the radar reference angle should be the same as the vehicle center line. And anything that's directly in front of us, when the radar signal returns, should have the highest signal strength. Anything that's outside of this reference angle would have a lower signal strength. So we have, here we're driving down the road and a vehicle passes us in the left-hand lane. Now, vehicle is supposed to stop. When it enters our divergence cone, question 1, will our vehicle be able to detect that vehicle? Question 2, will our vehicle do anything about it? So will automatic emergency braking slam on the brakes because it saw a car that was very close to us? Is it going to give us a forward collision warning with everything else being equal, properly calibrated, properly adjusted? Well, the answer is yes, it will detect the vehicle. It's within the radar divergence cone. But 2, it won't cause any corrective action because it has ways of determining that that vehicle is not a threat. Generally, there are 2 ways, and it's not that these 2 ways are mutually exclusive. Some manufacturers use both, but first is what's called the azimuth angle. So the azimuth angle is the angle between the reference angle and the object that's detected. So when a radar wave goes out in our divergence cone and a vehicle enters that cone, our radar signal hits that vehicle and some of it is deflected away from us because of the angle, but some of it is deflected back to us. We get a lower intensity signal return, which indicates that 1, the vehicle is not on our reference angle or directly in front of us, but 2, because this radar sensor is pulsing hundreds, if not thousands of times a second, as the vehicle continues to move and a radar sensor determines that the azimuth angle is decreasing and the signal strength is also decreasing, that indicates that the vehicle is in an adjoining lane and it's moving away from us. Whereas if that left lane was oncoming traffic, it would be the opposite. The return signature would be very low intensity and at a lower azimuth angle, and the intensity of the signal and the azimuth angle would increase as the vehicle in the oncoming traffic got closer. And with that information and the sophisticated software that the radar sensor uses, it would say that vehicle's not a threat. Now, there have been some technical service bulletins. Some vehicle manufacturers are having issues with their radar sensors. Nissan is one that's been in the news over the past year and a half with issues just like what we see here when a vehicle in oncoming traffic in the left lane comes into our divergence cone, and the radar sensor is not able to determine that that vehicle is not in front of us, and it does enact automatic emergency braking and forward collision warning, and it's causing vehicles to slam on their brakes in traffic and obviously cause other issues. So there's TSBs and updates and recalls for some vehicles with that type of issue. So I said that there were two ways. So here, this way was using the reference angle versus the azimuth angle. The other way is through sensor fusion. The radar sensor will still compare the reference angle to the azimuth angle. However, since the camera, the forward-facing camera in the windshield is used as a backup, the software asks the camera. It says, hey, camera, I just saw a vehicle enter my divergence cone. Is this vehicle a threat? The camera looks ahead. And again, I'm making this very, very basic. Camera looks ahead between the lane markings, because it's monitoring the lane markings, and says, no, there is not a new vehicle directly in front of us, and the vehicle can disregard it. So by using both applications, it can come to decisions much more quickly and much more accurately. But this is one of the examples, and this has been going on now for over 5 years, one of the examples of cameras and radar sensors working together. And when under certain circumstances, you change a windshield, you do a wheel alignment, and you may think that only the camera needs to be calibrated. When you're working on a vehicle utilizing sensor fusion, it's important that both components are calibrated so they can continue to work together accurately. Now, when taking an up-close look at a radar sensor, this is a Bosch long-range radar. It's a different style of Bosch long-range radar. It's flat, not the dome type. You can see it has that 10-millimeter mirror on the top. But what I wanted to show you here is the face of the radar sensor is made of a flat, plasticky material. You see an electrical connector. You see the plastic bracket that the sensor is snapped into, and you see the heavy metal bracket that the sensor is basically floating on. It's mounted on those two bolts. Well, those two bolts and the tips have small Allen heads that can be adjusted to change the angle of the sensor. So you can change both the pitch and the horizontal angle, the yaw of the sensor, during mechanical alignment prior to calibration. So minor collisions occur. That metal bracket may very well have survived, but a lot of times you'll see these plastic brackets break because the sensor gets impacted. It drives the sensor back towards the metal bracket and the plastic bracket shears away. That would require a replacement radar sensor. Any impact to a radar sensor, no matter how insignificant, the OEMs say the radar sensor should be replaced. If there's any damage to the face of the radar sensor, if that plastic face of the sensor isn't smooth, any dents, any dings, any nicks, that sensor is supposed to be replaced because it can no longer be 100% accurate. It can no longer properly control its sensor divergence cone. There'll be something interfering with it. So where are radar sensors located? Some vehicles like this Mercedes and other brands mount the sensor behind the front emblem. This means the front emblem and the grille need to be constructed of a radar permeable material, something that will not interfere with the radar signal. Other manufacturers like Honda, they decided to place their radar sensors lower in the grille in an opening and just leave it open to the world. This is fine, except for the fact that, again, road debris can impact that sensor, could cause damage to the face. Snow, sleet, mud can build up on the radar sensor, and you can get radar obstruction codes on the instrument cluster, and the forward collision warning and adaptive cruise control may be disabled. You'll see there's a trim ring, a plastic beauty ring around the sensor. It's more than a beauty ring. It's also there to protect the electrical connector and the adjustment screws. Now, also, let me back up for a second. Vehicles that utilize a radar permeable center emblem with the radar sensor mounted behind it still have issues with dirt and dust and bugs, debris, mud, snow, sleet building up on the front of that emblem, restricting the radar signal and therefore causing the systems to deactivate. In fact, on a Mercedes, in the owner's manual, under routine maintenance, they instruct the owner of the vehicle to routinely clean the grille. They don't say why. They just say clean the grille. More technically accurate, they should say clean the emblem. But again, they're meaning the entire grille, and many times that's not properly construed by consumers. Now, here's an example of a Bosch domed style long-range radar on a Jeep. They too mount them lower in the grille, wide out in the open, and you can see this vehicle's got that red tow hook indicating that this is an off-road vehicle, that it may be utilized in sand and in mud, and that radar sensor is going to get coated in mud, which will cause a radar obstruction code, preventing the sensor from operating. Needs to be cleaned off. Now, one thing that Jeep did on these vehicles is they have a plastic cover for the entire radar sensor, including the dome, that to help protect the radar sensor from road debris. So that's a removable cover that can be serviced independently. Here's another example. This is a Nissan utilizing a radar sensor. This happens to be a Continental sensor, low in the grille. But this particular one was at a shop for having issues. This sensor wouldn't calibrate. They kept getting calibration failures. So I went out to help them. And when I saw this in the parking lot, I took this picture. And if you notice, that sensor isn't entirely square to the grille. When I look more closely, this radar sensor is mounted with zip ties. So it's not pointing anywhere near in the correct direction. So it can't be aimed properly, which means it cannot be calibrated properly. The only way to fix this is to replace the sensor and the mounting bracket. Here's another example of a Nissan sensor, another Continental. A couple of things to point out here. Again, it's behind the emblem, but notice it says do not drop, exclamation point. In service information, Continental says if this sensor is dropped from a height of 3 feet or more, no matter if there's any visible damage, the sensor must be replaced. Well, this particular vehicle, if you look at it from the backside, you can see the metal bracket that it's attached to. This particular vehicle was a 2019, I believe it was a Nissan Sentra, may have been a Rogue. It was in a training class that I attended back in the late spring of 2019. So it was a brand new vehicle that was rented. When we got the vehicle, it would not calibrate. Brand new vehicle, only 3,000 something miles on it. And when we took a closer look, when we got the car, this is what the radar sensor looked like. It was bent backwards at about a 45-degree angle. That radar sensor is pointed up at the sky, and it could not properly function. It can't see a vehicle on the road, so adaptive cruise control and forward collision warning could not function properly. Now, we bend the bracket back so we could utilize the vehicle during the training session, but brackets should never be bent to correct an issue. They should only be replaced. Bending them causes further damage, and you can never tell if you have it bent properly. So we bent this back before we sent it back to the rental car agency, but we were able to play with this for calibration use. Now, here's part of a case study, but I'll just go over this quickly. This was a Honda Pilot or a Honda Odyssey minivan, and this is a blind spot sensor. Now, this vehicle was in a minor fender bender, got hit in the passenger side corner, and it was repaired and given back to the consumer. Consumer came back within a week with the complaint that their blind spot detection system on the driver's side worked just fine, but the passenger side would not detect vehicles in the lane next to them. But if a vehicle pulled up behind them, it would detect it. So the vehicle went back to the body shop. They called in a mobile diagnostic tech who took this photo and found that the radar sensor had been impacted during the collision. Now, it's easy to see the black sheet metal bracket is bent, but that's not really where the damage is. That structural component that's part of the rear quarter panel structural portion of the vehicle is also crushed in. And it took this sensor that should have been pointing out on a 45-degree angle back into the side. The sensor is now pointing straight back. So the body shop had to get a new bracket, which meant sectioning out a part of this structural component on the vehicle and replace the radar sensor at the same time. Now, Ford in their pickups and possibly in SUVs, if you've seen this logo on the taillight housing, blind spot radar, they have a radar sensor that is mounted internally to the taillight assembly. So initially, if a taillight assembly got cracked and needed to be replaced, you could only get it with a radar sensor. It's a $1,100 radar sensor. Well, luckily today, Ford sells these separately, radar sensor and the taillight housing. But just to give you an example of where that particular component is located. Now, just very quickly, ultrasonic sensors. Ultrasonic sensors have been around for decades, used as parking sensors. Ultrasonic sensors use a high frequency audible signal, a sound that we can't hear. Now, this is a sound wave, not a radio wave. It travels at the speed of sound, which makes it a much more slower reacting sensor than a radar signal. And generally, you'll see that vehicles have 4 of these in the back of the vehicle, 4 in the front. There's some cars that also have them on the side. But these 4 sensors produce a wide enough cone to be able to detect objects during parking and especially during backing up. For the most part, these sensors are replaceable, but not calibratable. However, on newer Toyota vehicles, these sensors need to be aimed. They're not calibrated, but aimed. So they need to be physically mounted correctly and aimed so they can do their job. Now, on a lot of high-end vehicles, people who drive vehicles that cost over $100,000 tend not to like those 4 cutouts in their bumpers. They think they look unattractive. So after receiving enough complaints, Audi has started using a new technology. Instead of ultrasonic, they're using electromagnetic proximity sensors. So an electromagnetic proximity sensor is very different than ultrasonic. It's actually a thin film or tape that's mounted to the inside of the bumper. And one sensor can wrap around the entire bumper, giving it a nice cone of protection. But instead of sending out an ultrasonic sound to detect, where an ultrasonic sensor looks for a reflected signal, and when it picks up that reflected ultrasonic sound, it gives a warning. This system puts out an electromagnetic field. And so we've created an electromagnetic field around the vehicle. And if anything interrupts that magnetic field, like a parked car or a pedestrian walks behind the car while you're backing up, it will give a warning indicating that there's an object detected. So this is electromagnetic proximity sensors are the wave of the future when it comes to parking sensors, except for the vehicle manufacturers who have chosen to use short-range or ultra-short-range radar sensors. Next, LiDAR. This is the new big technology. This is the technology that Elon Musk says is not needed and useless. This is the technology that most other vehicle manufacturers are going to be moving towards. It's either this or what's called high resolution radar, which is definitely coming. And it's a radar sensor that can give nearly the quality of information that you would see from LiDAR. So LiDAR stands for light detection and ranging. It uses a laser beam. That's the light source. So the laser beam shines out to an object. It illuminates the object with laser light. And when that light is reflected and picked up by the laser sensor and the LiDAR module, it maps that point. Now, most LiDAR sensors are using multiple laser beams. Now, when I talk about multiple laser beams, I'm talking about a true 360-degree rotating LiDAR. And if you haven't seen one, a 360-degree rotating LiDAR can have anywhere from 16 to 256 lasers that rotate in a pod about the size of a Home Depot bucket on the roof of the car. They rotate, and in some cases, they even scan up and down while they're rotating. And this laser light is shot out in all directions, and the reflected laser light maps individual points in space to produce a 360-degree 3D map of the surrounding area. And this is one example of what a LiDAR map might see, what the LiDAR sensor in the vehicle might see. So it can produce pretty high resolution images to where the software can pick out pedestrians and potted plants and benches and parked cars and driving cars and motorcycles and things like that. And because this sensor is constantly scanning, it's giving the vehicle a complete map of everything that's occurring all around the car. Well, there's a couple of problems with 360-degree rotating LiDAR. The first is they're not incredibly attractive. You know, who wants this monstrosity sitting on top of their brand new $80,000 Mercedes-Benz? Well, what we're looking at here is Waymo. They're a self-driving startup, and they're using this as a research vehicle. And quite frankly, they're not selling cars, so they don't care how it looks. But that entire module that looks like a luggage carrier on top of the vehicle, that is a LiDAR module. And it contains all the processing and the hardware and software to utilize the sensor that is mounted within that black pod. Now, Toyota, this has started working on what they say is a near production level LiDAR system. This was back in 2019. And what they're doing is instead of using a 360-degree rotating LiDAR, they're using multiple LiDAR sensors. And if you can tell in this image, there are two LiDAR modules facing forward, one facing to the left and one facing to the right, to give a 270-degree view of what's happening around the car. And they use radar sensors in the back to give the rest of the picture. So even this is expensive. And oh, by the way, a system like this on the Waymo vehicle at OEM cost is about $10,000. So imagine what that would be for consumer cost. System like this is still going to be very expensive. But again, this is a research vehicle, and they're still working on how to implement LiDAR moving forward. Well, Audi has produced a LiDAR system that they're utilizing today. It's in the United States today, starting in 2019 on the Audi A8L. This LiDAR module is not very big. It's about 6 inches wide, 4 inches tall, and it mounts in the grille. And it uses a single laser beam. So this single laser beam, instead of pointing out at the world to try to pick up objects, it's focused on a rotating mirror. That mirror rotates at a high speed, and it scatters the laser beam at a 145-degree scan angle. So these scattered laser beams are returned back, and the receiving unit picks up and maps what's in front of the car. So here we have a relatively low cost LiDAR, about $1,000 OEM cost, that does a great job of picking up everything that's in front of the vehicle. And Audi is even looking at mounting one of these in the back of the car to give, again, 270 degrees, actually 290 degrees of around vehicle detection. This particular radar sensor has a heating grid on the front to help melt snow and ice and things like that to allow the mirror to accurately scatter the laser beam. Now, this is a system that requires calibration. And here's what a calibration fixture for this looks like. So the LiDAR beam is going to scan and map the black and white patterns on this calibration fixture and calibrate the position of the sensor. Now, this particular calibration fixture is from Autel, but Audi sells this calibration fixture. I'm talking about just the black and white part, not the calibration frame, just the black and white part. That calibration fixture costs $5,700 from Audi. So yeah, some of these components using OE tools can be very, very expensive, where a target like this, I want to say, is less than $700 from Autel to do exactly the same job. So where all of this is going, and I mentioned previously, is sensor fusion. Not any one sensor type does a great job at everything. So for instance, cameras are okay at object detection. They're great at object classification. They're not so good at estimating distances, but they're very good at detecting the edges of objects, that edge detection. They don't have a great range of visibility, and they don't function well at all in bad weather. If the camera can't see, it can't detect. And of course, they function poorly in low lighting. Radar, on the other hand, has almost opposite quality set from the camera. It's very good at object detection, but it's horrible at classification. It does a great job at estimating distance, but it doesn't do edge detection, and it can't do lane tracking. It's got a great range of visibility. It functions good in bad weather and poor lighting, as long as that bad weather doesn't include heavy snow and heavy rain that would obstruct the radar wave. LiDAR, on the other hand, kind of fills in some of the gap from the other two. But where sensor fusion is going is this particular graphic says LiDAR, radar, and camera together will do it all. Most OEMs are utilizing camera and radar with maybe some other technologies to give the best of both worlds. And that brings us to multifunction units. So today, when we talk about sensor fusion, we are talking about a camera mounted to the windshield and a radar mounted behind the grille working together through software. Multifunction units combine componentry into a single component. So many vehicles today have a camera in the windshield, and that camera is a module. It's its own computer. The radar is also a module. It's its own computer. And they need to talk back and forth on the CAN bus to share information. Some vehicle manufacturers like Honda have separated the components. The camera is a sensor, the radar is a sensor, and it has what's called an integrated driver support module that one computer utilizes both of those components to make decisions. It saves money and it reduces processing power requirements, where at the same time, it increases the speed of decision making. Multifunction units combine everything into one component. And these three multifunction units are from different component manufacturers. The one on the left has a dual laser sensor. It has a forward-facing camera. It has a thermal imaging sensor. And it's actually an ultraviolet sensor and an ultraviolet emitter. The one on the bottom has a stereoscopic camera. It has a single wide angle camera, and then it has a thermal imager for night vision. The one on the right has a single camera and dual laser with a high beam automatic high beam sensor for detecting oncoming traffic. But here's an example of Volvo's city safety system. Now, this is back from 2016, 2017. So these have been around for a while. So when you look at a windshield and you see multiple cutouts, you're generally looking at a multifunction unit. So this particular system, you have a forward-facing camera with a heating grid. And that heating grid is to prevent ice and snow from sticking to the windshield and blocking the camera's view. You have a rain sensor for automatic windshield wipers. And here, so many people think automatic windshield wipers are for the driver. Actually, in talking to ADAS engineers from different OEMs, the side benefit of the rain sensor and automatic windshield wipers is to the driver. The main benefit is to the forward-facing camera. As rain starts to build up on the windshield, the automatic wipers need to clear that rain buildup so the camera can see clearly. There's also an automatic high beam sensor and a dual beam laser. They call it a laser radar. That's a contradiction in terms. It's a laser sensor. So they have two laser emitters. It's actually an emitter and a sensor for detecting objects. Now, as you can imagine, this Volvo system this was in an XC60. So it's not the highest end Volvo, but it's a more costly vehicle. Toyota is now placing multifunction units, camera and laser radar. It's a single beam laser that all it does is object detection and speed estimation. So they're doing this dual function camera laser to provide lane departure warning, forward collision warning, automatic emergency braking, and automatic high beam for base vehicles. Starting in 2019, Toyota started installing this on base vehicles as standard equipment. And those base vehicles, this is what it looks like, the image on the right from a real vehicle. But starting in 2016 with the Prius C, the 2017 and newer Yaris, the 2017 and newer Corolla, that have the Toyota Safety Sense C system come with this functionality as standard equipment. So this is a calibratable camera. The laser sensor is not calibratable. It can be indexed, but it's not necessarily a calibration that we would think of. Toyota has multiple levels of safety sense. These base vehicles do not have any option for higher end ADAS functionality, just what comes with it. Toyota thought for people who don't have the funds for a high-end vehicle, they wanted to give them the basic ADAS functionality that would help them drive their vehicle more safely. Then they have Toyota Safety Sense P, which is for passenger vehicles. And most Toyota vehicles have Safety Sense P. There's a new system, newer system, Toyota Safety Sense 2.0, that is their highest end system. Actually, that's not true. Their higher end system that has much higher functionality, higher end systems, a lot more ADAS capability. And it also utilizes, I don't know if you've seen the Toyota one-time recognition calibration target for the forward-facing camera, 3 targets in one for a faster calibration. Where in 2021, Toyota launched Toyota Safety Sense 2.5 that has even more functionality, but they still have the different levels of Safety Sense in 2021. And the difference is basically the level of functionality and the level of active control the ADAS system has over vehicle operation. So with that, if we have any questions, feel free to unmute yourself, or if you like, you could go ahead and type any questions into the chat function. No questions?
Quiet group today.
Yes.
Must have done just the best job ever explaining it.
Yeah, that's what I tell myself.
Yeah, well, if anybody does have any questions that they think of, feel free to send them to me and I can forward them on to George.
That would be great.
Yep.
I look forward to seeing everyone in 2 weeks when we hit session 4 and start getting into ADAS calibrations. Oh, here we go. Excellent question. Does tire pressure affect camera angle? Absolutely yes. In fact, it's one of the main reasons that every OEM has you check tire pressure and inflate it to the placard pressure before you calibrate. And the reason I call out placard pressure is many consumers may like to run their tires at different pressures. Well, for calibration, you would need to set it to the placard pressure to place the camera in a proper angle. And we'll get into why in the next 2 sessions. But that also brings up tire pressure monitoring systems. Most forward-facing cameras and forward-facing radars will deactivate if you have a TPMS light on. So if it knows that tire pressure is incorrect, that's telling it that it can't trust the angle of the camera or the radar sensor, and it will deactivate some systems. Good question. All right. Well, thanks again, everyone. And we will see you in 2 weeks.
Yep, that'll be the 27th, same time, same place. All right, thanks, everybody.
Have a great night.